Hey, this is Michael joining.
Hey, morning.
This is Khaled.
Or evening. Everybody.
And Howard, are we waiting on specific folks before we get started?
Yeah, I think maybe another like 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. See if Torin and others will join. Okay, it's 8:05. Let's start. So first of all, as usual, some update for the KubeCon preparation. I sent the PR article to the Linux Foundation liaison, and she suggests that it would be actually better to publish the article on Kubernetes blog. So she said she will forward our article to the people that will be adding to Kubernetes blog. So let's see what will happen next. I think it would be great to have a feature article on the policy working group on this style. So the set planning, I think we could settle that now, and I think I could send the updated detailed schedule to the CNCF events stuff. So the intersection on May the 2nd, that'll be the 2 parts. And for the deep dive session on May 3rd, we have confirmation for at least 5 or 6 talks. So I think that should be enough, and really great to have all these project and SIGs to provide updates. So if there's no like further problem about the agenda, I can just send this to the CNCF event staff and they will update on the schedule so that everyone could see it. Okay.
I think this looks good.
Yeah. Oh, actually, another thing is, well, this is actually part of the OpenStack tradition. Anyone want to do a team dinner? Maybe on May the 3rd?
I'm definitely open to it. I will be there until Friday morning, and I think I get there maybe late on Monday evening. So I think anything in that window should be fine.
Which hotel are you still staying at?
Let me double check, and I can ping you on Slack.
Okay, since my hotel is like downtown, I think. So let's see where our hotels are and see if we, just have a dinner downtown or around the convention center.
Yes, I would also be down, except I'm not great at planning things and haven't planned or anything. So yeah.
Okay, just send me your hotel information and I see what I could come up. Okay, great. Maybe I think that's it for the KubeCon preparation. 1 week countdown.
So for the actual intro presentation, I haven't had a chance to get back to any of the slides since just creating the initial NT deck.
Yeah. I probably start working on it today or tomorrow, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. Next, I see Dan's here. So, Dan, could you give us like a review of the SAFE working group presentation on the TOC meeting?
You bet, Howard. So this Tuesday at the TOC, we presented the SAFE working group focused on cross-cloud safety and cross-user safety, cross-platform as well. So presentation went very well. Everybody is, no objections, but there was, since the inception of the project, folks at first blush tend to have, a bit of a, question around, what is this safety thing? It's not something that we're used to prioritize. And then after, a little bit deeper understanding, folks get bought in. I went through the same process myself when JJ originally, introduced me to the concept, or what he was planning on working on. So that did come up, and at this point we are heading to KubeCon in Copenhagen. We have 2 sessions there. One on the first day, and on one of the first on the first day. It's an intro, and on the third day we have a deep dive. And our hope is to finalize our champions there, and move towards a ratified group out of KubeCon.
So, like, what's the procedure for like official establishment of working group?
Right. So we get to go through and be the guinea pig. So as we're proposing this working group, Chris A is actually landing the working group process. And in the TOC meeting, I actually raised their hand, not to define that process, but to be willing to be a guinea pig in the CNCF's definition of that. Yeah, we don't. The real answer is we don't know. We're working through it. We have 40 folks that are active in the group, and across a broad section of companies. One thing that folks did call out in that meeting was an interest in making sure that the safe working group didn't compete or have any sort of competing standards or results with Kubernetes, and specifically policy. I think we brought up policy working group, but most specifically the SIG-Auth group was something that was flagged as a concern. And so I noticed a couple folks there from this group in SIG-Auth, and I would love your all's feedback on this working group's relationship with SIG-Auth. I'm new. JJ and I both joined yesterday, and we're looking at engaging there specifically with some of the subgroups.
Yeah. So, what will be the the major aspect that you are looking forward our working group to further align with the SAFE? Do we have any specific topics or directions in mind?
No, just the recommendation is just make sure that you're collaborating, and that's always been a consideration for us anyway. So the request is fairly easy to satisfy, but with the presentation to the COC, we did explicitly reach out and do a call for use cases in the phase that we're going through. Over the next quarter, we're going to be identifying use cases and building corpus of of use cases and specific understanding of how CNCF projects and members are using policy and defining secure access control.
Okay, great.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, this group is fairly obvious group to collaborate with, and there's beyond that, there's really no specific action. It's just ongoing invitation to join the SAFE meetings. Feedback is invited on what would be valuable to this working group, and how we can better as we begin preparing docs. If there are specific needs that this group has that relate to understanding of broader cloud needs, then please feel free to reach out to myself, or JJ, or Sarah Allen, or anybody in the group, really.
Okay, sounds great.
Thank you.
One last question from me. If there's any TOC members endorsement, I remember one of the criteria is to have TOC member to sign on the working group, be a sponsor, something like that.
Right. Yes, privately. I'm not sure I can call them out because they haven't chosen to put their name out there publicly. So yes, we've identified a partner, but until they choose to put their name out there, I don't feel comfortable speak on their behalf.
Okay.
But yes,
great.
that's an important step that we're looking for, and we came in to the TOC meeting with a proposal already presented to the TOC member as potential candidate. Everything was positive in the meeting, and expect to be able to go and hopefully land. Our hope is to land at KubeCon in Copenhagen. So there won't be a May 1st TOC meeting. That's been canceled. May 1st or 2nd. Sorry. There won't be a subsequent TOC meeting. So I'm uncertain as to how that will how that will shift our ratification. Whether or not that can happen outside of a TOC meeting, I actually really don't know.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's
Thank you.
really great. Information. So moving on next. Last meeting we agreed upon. We took these three current proposals as like the concrete concrete example that we could working on or started working on for the architecture design proposal actually. So I still haven't like figure out how we like should better organize the discussion, the flow of the discussion for these three proposals. So do we have any suggestions? So I think we should set up like timelines or like for every week like these are the items that we need to get at least an initial conclusion on or something like that. So without that we might just lost it. So any suggestion on how should we better discuss these proposals?
I like the idea of some timelines on where these are in kind of in discussion or whether in implementation, perhaps then specific, I don't know if we want to say questions or items of discussion for policy in general, or something like that.
Okay. So
open questions, something, I don't know.
Yeah, I think this begs like another question. The current workgroup meeting is good for Asia and the US, but really not for Europe. So if we want to invite like Yasin to further elaborate on the development of the scheduling policy PR, we might need to have a like TikTok meeting that better suit for the EU.
Also, the scheduling has a TikTok for the 2 time zones.
Oh,
so it is actually going on right now as well. So maybe we could opposite of them or something.
TikTok. So what might be like better time for you guys, since if when Europe wakes up is usually starting like 2 p.m. in China, which will be 11 p.m. On the West Coast and 2 a.m. on the East Coast. So usually a good time for EU conversation will be like early morning in the US. So
What is the latest those of you in China or that part of the world would be willing to stay up?
Well, I could do as late as to 1.
An alternative is to do. Actually, never mind. What I was going to say. No, I mean I was going to say maybe something that's very late instead of something that's very late in the U.S. instead of something that's very early in the U.S. But that kind of only works if you have Eastern time zone or Pacific time zone in the U.S., but not both. So never mind.
Yeah, I know.
But you could pick something like, if we had the 8 p.m. slot and then a 10 a.m. slot, and I think I'm thinking 10 a.m. Eastern. That'd be 7 a.m. Pacific. That'd be a convenient time in Europe, and it's 10 p.m. somewhat in the Asia time zone, depending on where you're at.
Yeah.
It may not be possible to find a time that works for all three.
I know.
That's why, I mean, so we could try to do what the SIG scheduling is doing, like a 5 p.m. and a 10 a.m. or I think is what they were doing. Because at least that gets 2 out of 3 for each.
Okay.
I don't know.
Maybe.
Or I guess 3 out of 4, I think. Time zones for each of the meetings.
We went to 3 different time zones in Node and 3 different timings, and it got mad. You just couldn't follow along what's the thing, what was actually expected. There's no real sense of cadence. So I would advise starting look at starting with 2. Keep it simple.
Yeah. Okay, maybe
should we just say we'll alternate with SIG scheduling, do something like that since they've already.
I would like that one. Yeah, I'd like that one.
We could do both. What I don't know what their U.S. morning time is, but alternate whatever that both of them.
Okay, so what shall we have parallel meeting with the same time with the SIG scheduling or the opposite?
No, I think alternating, just in the weeks that they don't have theirs, we would do ours.
Okay.
So they alternate every other week between the 2, or they alternate every week between the 2 times, and so we could be on those. We could alternate every week between the 2 times, but opposite of them.
Man, this is harder than scheduler design. Okay, great. Maybe just another item for the KubeCon session discussion as well. We could collect some preference for the EU folks. Okay, anyways, back to the proposal discussion. So we want to have specific timelines on each of the proposal, which meaning we need to invite or at least identify owner for each proposal. So I know Yisui could be the one on security profile. Service topology, I think I could talk to, oh God, I even forgot the name, the guy from Huawei, I think he's working on the code implementation. And scheduling policy, I think we just tap Yasin.
I can also represent it.
Oh, cool. Yeah, no problem. So that said, any other, what criteria are we looking at for the a sprint or milestones if we're setting up for this proposal discussion?
The basic timeline for scheduling policy right now is start hacking on a POC next week. We don't think we can make it into 111, but aim for 112 alpha.
Okay. So, Yisui, any of the timeline suggestion for the security profile?
I plan to make the demo ready. I record the demo by next week. And there's no specific timeline to align with the Kubernetes version.
Okay.
So the current proposal is still being reviewed by the SIGOS, so I have no idea when we can get that into official repo.
Okay. So, for example, for scheduling policy, if they're aiming at the 12, we need to like work backwards on our discussion planning, right? So 12 is Q3, right?
Something like that.
That's late September.
Yeah, I think the important parts for our discussion are one, the kind of proposal closes,
Yeah.
if that makes sense, when we've kind of said
Yeah.
we're stopped taking suggestions or not suggestions, but you know what I'm saying.
Okay. Okay. So
and then
where are you?
the other
where
one
you
would.
headed? Erica, could you just
Sure.
take like introduction of the or update on this item for us, since you are the most familiar with this topic.
It's scheduling policy kind of has been driven by the newer kind of ways to specify scheduling and things like extending from the taints and tolerations, the preemption and priority. There are needs to kind of make sure things like if you're doing a self-hosted cluster that the master pods are isolated and no one can bump them off or anything. And so they have ways to start kind of making sure things have priorities, like priority classes. But in like multi-tenant environments, especially, we need a way to make sure that any pod can't just change a label on itself and bump off the master or something like that. So there's a strong need for this, or a lot of different parties would like this very quickly. It has some general agreement that this is a good policy to add. Then there were some more, we're starting obviously to think about more general policy. So it's an immediate case in place to start talking about how to make sure that our policy has some conventions in the policy API group. So that's a lot of the discussion right now is, do these make sense for both the scheduling policy and do they make sense as extensible to policy in general, for policy for Kubernetes specific things? So the latest revision came out this week, and discussion is going on for that. And kind of like what's the right way to specify the policies and compose those in the most clear way. I think one decision that's been made within the last week for sure was just talking about at the namespace level, not sub-pod characteristics for matching. So that's one decision. There's still kind of discussion around what defaults, what role that should play, as well as what the right verbs in composition are.
Okay. I remember one of the requests from Yasin is maybe our working group could provide suggestion on if the scheduling policy should belong to the in-tray, the core component, or maybe something in, something out, or
yes.
Yeah.
I think the decision has been that it should be a core within the policy API group that's within the Kubernetes offering, since it's talking about something very specific to the core of what Kubernetes is.
Mm-hmm.
that it should, though, at the same time, start talking and working towards what the conventions should be for policy, as well
Okay.
as what the right places might be for the interface of policy and what, like, a policy engine, external, internal, etc.
So if they are inclined towards an entry implementation, that means this proposal will add a new policy API to Kubernetes, right?
Yes.
So that's like automatically means that it should be general enough. So maybe not strictly limited to the original proposal.
I think you might be getting into some of the other proposal that came out around the same time by Tim around just more general sort of pod properties. And there's a lot of, I think, concern around that. Also, since scheduling is something that has to do with a core part of the what Kubernetes does in the matching of the node to the pod.
Okay,
So that it would be better to use it as alongside thinking about policy and how we would extend it in general, but keep it kind of more clean and straight in the API.
Okay, I'm still a little bit confused about, for example, there's like non-goals for how pod affinity, anti-affinity rules work, but there's also requirement for like the ability to require that a pod under namespace run on dedicated nodes. So, and also expressing pod affinity or anti-affinity rules. So how?
I think what they mean is, or what that's trying to say is, it's not about the specifics of how the schedulers interpret and the pod anti-infinity so much as assuming they're doing it in the way that is mostly correct, that the administrators or whoever else can properly make policy that will enforce that.
Okay. So the policy API, if we may call it, will only expressing the rules, right? But not concerned about the specific implementation of pod affinity, anti-affinity scheduling mechanism.
Yes, I don't think we're thinking about right now having this same new feature set, like double check that it has resulted in the right thing according to its interpretation of affinity.
So is this namespace scope or cluster or both?
It is defines by namespaces. That's how it kind of like sets the policies that this applies to a namespace as a whole or not. So sort of, since it's acting on top of the namespaces, it's cluster wide.
So what would be the relationship between this one and E3's security profile proposal?
I believe, as if I understand it, that this would be one of these sort of configurations that can automatically make sure it's applied to the right new namespaces. That is kind of an initial bootstrap, probably placing the right initial pods or whatever else. So it'd be one component of many policies, etc., that gets defined in that profile.
Yeah, I think that's right. I agree with that.
Can you summarize again, Erica?
I think one of the components of the security profile is what I like to think about sort of as like a deployment, as a deployment is to a pod. In the sense, so that this profile can contain, like, these are the sets of scheduling policies for this cluster.
Okay.
In other words, there's nothing special about it as compared to any of the other policy objects.
Okay, so that means these two proposals should working together, right? So the security profile is like a upper layer provide for the tooling for the deployment of the profiles, and the scheduling policy is the working mechanism for the.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay. Okay. Policy composition, policy.
That might be one of the more difficult places that if people have sort of opinions about.
Okay. So I think I'm thinking about what specific areas our working group as a whole could provide input.
I think one of the ways is what is the right wording to use? Does it make sense? Do you have these policies that apply? How do you compose them in the right way, which makes most sense in the most intuitive way? So a lot of most of the things that don't have the word scheduling in it are pretty actually general and not specific to a scheduling at all.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing that I think is also one of the hardest places to think about is, do you have what's the fall through mode? How do you order policies correctly? Or when do you reject? How do you reject? Things like that.
Okay, so for action items.
Mostly, if people could take a look at the discussion that's going on and the most recent changes and chime in if you have opinions.
Yeah, so I think just overall, maybe the first directions that we can provide input on is the policy syntax.
Yes, syntax, policy syntax.
And
how
and
they
the one you just mentioned.
Composition.
Yeah. Composition method, actually. So these will be the two good starting, at least starting point for us to provide a concrete input for that proposal.
Yes.
Okay, great. Sounds great. And another direction we were looking at is, of course, how these three correlates to each other and falls into a bigger architecture picture. Okay, so I don't think we have the service topology people here. Isui, do we have any update regarding the design and there's a PR?
There's almost no change in the design. I just sent out the PR yesterday.
Okay, cool.
So I put 2 secure profile examples in the PR. And I think basically 2 directions. So the one thing is we want to nail down is go through the implementations, like how the things gets implemented. I'd like to collect more feedbacks. The other thing is about the security profile itself. Will that be reasonable to define what kind of secure profile and what's the actual insight will be useful for people?
I don't want to is this the right place to discuss some of the things? Because I've been thinking about it since you talked about it at SIGAUTH, but I don't want to basically extend a conversation across every single SIG I'm in.
So I don't know what has the best place to discuss about this. So this PR sent to SIGAUTH is basically getting more comments from people. And hopefully if the SIGAUS can approve this PR and we can move forward for implementation.
It seems like there are pieces that are very kind of policy, and then there are things that seem more general. Could we in any way factor out into a separate sort of discussion and implementation some of the policy things?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
So, well, what do you mean? I don't quite catch. So, yeah.
Yeah. So you the security profile proposal has encompassed a lot of things in it. Not only like policy and also other like deployment and other things. So I think what Erica asked is that could you or would it be possible for you to, for example, factoring out maybe the policy aspect of things?
Okay, so I
Would
think
it be possible?
yeah, it's three categories. I think the first category is about the policy for setting up the command line flags for all the components, and currently there's no such kinds of policy defined yet. So I think this is one piece of that. And the next two are cluster level policies, which is class scoped, and the third one is namespace scoped policies. So for class scoped policies or namespace scoped policies, I think there will be a lot of overlapping between other discussions like the scheduling policy and maybe other policies.
Okay, so the first candidate is the command line.
Yeah.
How should I call that? The policy.
Just say command line flag or say bootstrapping rules.
Bootstrapping.
I've read some proposals out there. I thought about kind of cluster config and moving away maybe from command line flags, or is that kind of incorporated in this in some way, or other types of ways of kind of gathering cluster config?
Cluster config can be a way. Actually, I always think that as implementation details. So, but from policy's perspective, how we define these flags, like whatever the flag is going to be expressed in the command line, or it's going to be incorporated into something like component config, it doesn't matter. But more important thing is what's the right settings of these flags.
Cool. That sounds right. Cool. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's just start with the bootstrapping rules as our starting place for the security profile, and also overall review of the design and are also welcomed, I think.
Yeah, I think a good way to structure the bootstrapping rules is we can think about just very simple 2 or 3 commonly used security profiles, which cover like 2 or 3 different kinds of user scenarios. And these should be generic enough. Then for each of them, we can think carefully about the command line, the bootstrapping rules, how the command line flags should be specified.
Okay. Okay, good. Okay, I think starting next week, we can kickstart the weekly discussion on the specific PRs, these 3 PRs. Okay. Any other like topics you guys want to cover for today? Since I don't think we can have like a good discussion on the architecture design section of the design doc with without having some clear vision of these 3 PRs.
Without, sorry, I didn't hear you. Without a clear, what did you say?
Without like clear understanding of these proposals. Well, what I meant is that after several rounds of discussion on these 3 proposals, maybe we could have like something solid for the architecture design proposal, right? For the overall design proposal. So otherwise, now we are just talking about concept.
I think some things I don't know if this exactly makes sense, but do we have a good idea of where the areas are that policy should be kind of like inserted? Do we have opinions around kind of the separation of enforcement versus interpretation?
Yeah, that's gonna be a big question.
And maybe another big one, just that I maybe shouldn't throw out there, but are namespaces and the way we latch onto them, is that because of a limitation in something else, or because it's the right way to, I don't know. It seems like we either go from like some kind of label selectors of some sort, which is basically some arbitrary thing, or namespaces. Do we need something else to actually make this easier to reason about?
Yeah, so I don't know if everyone saw, like Brian Grant had written on one of these policy related issues, like these 5 or 6 bullet points about some of the differences across different types of policies that might be useful to think about how we could make them consistent. Like concretely, like some policies are namespace scoped, some are cluster scoped. To what you just said, some of them apply to a namespace, some of them apply using a label selector. And so I can try to dig that up and put it in the meeting notes. But I think that whole list of questions, which includes what you just brought up, is worth thinking about. Because there are a lot of inconsistencies, like each policy object to a certain extent does things differently. And so if we can bring some coherence to that, that would be useful.
Is this the one?
Probably. Like search for B Grant on there. I think it's somewhere in there towards the bottom.
At the bottom.
That looked no,
Yeah, this one I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, built-in. So, well, back to the question. So the main question is, do you guys think we could like start discussion of the like architecture design in parallel to the specific like PR discussions, or shall we wait after we have something concrete from the PR discussions? I'm open to either ways.
I think that in parallel is best because they're going to each inform each other.
Okay. My English is definitely broken.
By the way, Erica, what was the thing you said before the namespace? Like, is the namespace the right granularity to be applying policies? There was some other.
Oh, I was thinking about that. I think I had 2 things. One is that there are probably enforcement points, places. Policy, I guess, is where decisions have to be made, and you have to apply some general rules to make decisions. So there are certain places that these kind of decisions are made in this context. And if we can kind of say, okay, this is the right line for where to make these decisions in some way that the system's aware of. And then I think the other one was how much separation is advisable between enforcement, interpretation, and definition of policy.
Okay, got it.
would it be possible to have like namespace for policy? Like we have network namespace and policy namespace.
What do you? I don't understand. Can you explain that a little
Well,
more?
it's just a thought. Never mind. It's just bouncing out of my head.
A really concrete thing, actually, if we could just set an expectation around how often policies get updated and what the consistency is reasonable to expect, I think that might actually be useful.
What? Sorry. What do you mean? Like, don't different policies? Well, sorry. Can you just explain that a little?
These policies, are they objects that have to be spread across the cluster? Do we make it very clear that there's a period where, like, kind of like it takes a while for a token to expire or whatever, for these things to come into effect? How real time should be expected to be needed to be built into the system in taking into consideration, well, the distributed nature.
The longevity. So maybe it's the task of a policy controller to define it.
Yeah,
or would that be like a meta policy?
How many policies of policies can you make? At what point does it end?
Policy on policies.
Isn't that what we're doing now?
I tend to think, though, when we think about policy, I think the enforcer itself is going to be the determiner, is going to be what determines how quickly the policy goes into effect. I tend to think that getting too abstract on sort of what you're, I think, really kind of describing as a quality of service for when the policy begins to be enforced or how long it takes to expire. And I tend to think that's going to be more complicated to manage than what most of the folks responsible for defining policy will really comprehend. I tend to think that for the most part, when a policy change goes into effect, any future requests that call into some kind of policy decision point will immediately begin enforcing that new policy behavior.
Yeah, this is coming out of like some, I would say actually more practical implementation thinking rather than theoretical of just like, okay, if you have a bunch of admission webhooks, or how often do each person's cache, not persons, but things cache get refreshed? How could you specify if you needed one sort of policy engine to be updated at a different speed than something else, and therefore need that information to be synced on a more regular, not regular basis? Is there even a way to like know that or set expectations about what it should be?
Is it something that each policy enforcer could simply document as part of their contract with clients who are calling API? I mean, really, you want to know how long that window is, but whether or not you need to make that configurable, I think, is maybe the question you're probing on. So if an admission controller webhook has a cache where it's actually remembering a decision that was made previously, then it might simply document the cache. Things in the cache expire every 15 minutes. So at most, you would have a window of about 15 minutes when the policy was going into effect, by trading off the performance and the scalability aspect for enforcement aspect.
Yes, and I don't think I would be in favor necessarily of trying to make it all configurable so much as making it very clear that this is what the expectation for it is within Kubernetes.
And that I think makes sense. I think being crisp on the documentation for the API or for the policy declaration itself makes a lot of sense, right? What are the real world, as you say, practical implementation concerns that inhibited something immediate? Great, capture that. But I don't know that trying to make the next layer configurable, because then you've got to figure out, well, how long does it take the quality of service that I've just defined to go into effect as well? Now, if all of the decisions have to do with caching, it may not be the worst consideration to actually define your cache timeout, your invalidation timeout. That I could see being something that you would just append to the policy itself and say, decisions made by this admission controller can be cached for up to 60 seconds or 10 minutes or 3 days.
Yes, it's. I think this might be just a more the general distributed systems problem, but I guess people seem. I've been hearing in discussions a lot more expectations around this than perhaps we've thought about in other situations.
Okay. Okay, then let's just keeping the discussion in parallel, both the specific PRs and also the our design document. I think we could start like with the Brian Grant's bullet points for discussion. Okay, so we are almost at the end of the meeting. Please don't forget to send me your hotel information, okay? So I can start a plan on the team dinner.
Sounds good.
Okay, okay. By the way, do you guys prefer like May the 1st or May the 3rd after the deep dive session of the day?
So doing it earlier might actually help us prepare and make sure we're more comfortable for both the intro session and the deep dive session. Just actually
you mean
meeting
the
in person and kind of talking through it.
Ah, okay, okay, cool.
So I would probably prefer to target the 1st versus the 3rd.
Yeah, okay. Oh, David, would it be possible for you if E3's demo's ready to give a lightning talk on the deep dive May the 3rd?
Yeah, definitely. I
great.
was planning to do that. If I think it sounds like he's going to have it ready from what he said. So if it's ready, I can definitely. Oh, so actually, to be clear, what he was going to do is record a demo, and then I can just press the play button. So I thought, and he suggested that. I think that's a great idea. So
Okay.
one way or another, there will be a demo. It may not be live, but yeah.
Okay, sounds great. Okay, that's it. Thank you guys, and let's meet next week, right before. Shall we meet next week? Oh, yes. You guys won't travel next week, right? Or shall we cancel the meeting next week?
I won't be traveling until that Monday of the week. I think meeting next week would probably be good. I think our agenda topic is probably to review what we'll cover for the intro session.
Yeah. Okay, so let's
and for that, if there are segments that I can help in terms of preparing for that, just let me know, and I'm happy to contribute to that material as well, and kind of boiling out what we have in the mission and the charter and those things into what we'll cover.
Cool. Okay. Thank you, guys. Let's meet next week.
Thank
Right.
you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.